Billie Eilish can't stop crying watching Nat Wolff unveils engagement ring for her. No one in that room was ready for what happened next. Not the cameras. Not the guests. Not even Billie Eilish herself. What was supposed to be a quiet, intimate evening between close friends and loved ones turned into one of the most emotional moments anyone had ever witnessed, when Nat Wolff slowly reached into his pocket and revealed something that instantly changed the entire atmosphere. And the moment Billie saw it, she completely lost it. Tears filled her eyes. Her hands began trembling. Her lips quivered. And within seconds, she was crying so hard she could barely breathe. Because what Nat was holding wasn't just a ring. It was a promise. A confession. A moment that seemed to hold every emotion they had been trying to keep hidden for so long. And if you thought their relationship had already reached its peak, what happened that night proved that their love story may have just entered a whole new chapter. But before we get into the full emotional scene, let's rewind, because what led to that heartbreaking, beautiful, unforgettable moment is even more intense than anyone realized. And trust me, by the end of this story, you'll understand exactly why Billie Eilish couldn't stop crying. Part 1, the relationship everyone was watching. For months, fans had been speculating that something deeper was happening between Billie Eilish and Nat Wolff. It started with subtle moments. The lingering eye contact. The inside jokes. The quiet way they seemed to naturally gravitate toward each other, even in crowded spaces. And perhaps most telling of all, the calm, almost sacred energy they seemed to create whenever they were together. People noticed. At first, many assumed it was just friendship. After all, both Billie and Nat have always carried themselves with a certain emotional intensity that naturally makes every interaction feel cinematic. But over time, it became harder and harder to ignore the signs. There was something in the way Nat looked at Billie. Not casually. Not platonically. But with the kind of softness that only comes from deep admiration. And Billie? She looked different around him too. Calmer. Safer. More grounded. For someone who has lived so much of her life under constant public pressure, Billie has always been careful about who she lets close. She's known what it feels like to be misunderstood. To be watched. To be judged. To have every smile, every silence, every relationship turned into a headline. So when fans noticed that she seemed unusually open, almost emotionally relaxed around Nat, the speculation only intensified. And yet, neither of them said much. No huge declarations. No dramatic confirmations. No official statements. Just moments. Tiny, beautiful, impossible to ignore moments. And somehow, that made everything even more powerful. Because sometimes, the loudest love stories are the ones that are barely spoken at all. Part 2, Billie's quiet struggles behind the smile. But what many people didn't fully realize was just how emotional Billie had been privately in the weeks leading up to that unforgettable night. According to people close to the situation, Billie had been carrying a lot internally. She had been smiling in public. Showing up. Working. Creating. Doing what she always does, turning pain into beauty and composure into art. But inside, she was overwhelmed. Not necessarily because something was wrong between her and Nat, but because something felt too right. And that can be terrifying. When you've been hurt before, when you've experienced disappointment, emotional confusion, heartbreak, or simply the fear of being misunderstood. Real love doesn't always feel easy at first. Sometimes it feels scary. Because suddenly, there's something real to lose. And people close to Billie began noticing that she had become more emotional whenever conversations about the future came up. Marriage. Commitment. Forever. Building a life with someone. These weren't just abstract ideas anymore. Not for her. Because for the first time in a long time, she may have started believing that forever was actually possible. And that realization, it shook her deeply. Not because she didn't want it. But because she did. So much. And wanting something that badly, especially when your heart has been through storms, can bring out emotions you didn't even know were still living inside you. That's why, when the night of Nat's surprise finally arrived, Billie was already carrying a fragile emotional weight that nobody in the room could fully see. Until it all came pouring out. Part 3, the night that felt different from the start. The evening itself was described as elegant, warm, and deeply intimate. No giant stage. No overwhelming press setup. No flashy Hollywood chaos. Just candlelight. Soft music. A beautifully decorated private venue. And an atmosphere that felt almost too perfect to be accidental. Billie arrived dressed in a way that was effortlessly stunning, simple, emotional, understated, but impossible to ignore. She looked beautiful in the kind of way that doesn't scream for attention, but quietly commands it. Nat, meanwhile, seemed unusually nervous. And that alone was enough to make a few people suspicious. Because people who know Nat say he usually carries himself with a natural ease. But that night? He was different. He smiled, yes. He laughed. He played it cool. But every now and then, he'd glance toward Billie with this unreadable expression, a mixture of love, fear, anticipation, and something else. Something huge. Several guests later said they could feel that something was coming. Not because anyone knew the exact plan. But because the energy in the room was impossible to ignore. It felt like one of those nights where time itself starts moving differently. Like everyone had unknowingly stepped into a memory before it had even fully happened. And Billie? At first, she seemed unaware. She was relaxed. Laughing softly. Leaning into conversations. Smiling in that shy, beautiful way she does when she actually feels safe. But as the night went on, small details began to shift. The music softened. The lights dimmed slightly. And one by one, conversations around the room began fading. Until eventually, all eyes landed on Nat. And that's when Billie's expression changed. Part 4, when Nat stood up, everything stopped. At first, Billie looked confused. Nat slowly stood from his seat and took a deep breath. The room fell silent. Not awkwardly silent. Not tense. Just, still. The kind of silence that happens when every heart in a room senses that something unforgettable is about to happen. Billie looked up at him and gave a nervous little smile, almost as if to say, "What are you doing?" And Nat just looked back at her. Longer than usual. Deeper than usual. Like he wasn't just seeing her face in that moment, he was seeing every version of